We're up. We're live on the tube, mate.
Hello, Tube.
Hello, tube. We're live on a YouTube. Mic check, 1 2 1 2. Mic check. I'll do for me. There we go. The newest member of the Hop Edition crew.
The true Brewdog has arrived.
Yes.
Here he is.
Please tell me you've named him Brian.
Look at that little fella.
Have you named him Brian?
No. This is. Here he is. Come easy. He's quite chunky. Oh, here
Gary.
he is.
I'm thinking Gary.
This is Hudson.
Oh, Hudson. He did go with Hudson.
Yeah.
Hudson's a good name.
This is Hudson. I think I just woke him up, and he's wondering what's going on.
Looks a little bit sleepy.
Well, he's licking your
Oh,
face, mate, so
look
you're
at
all good.
Mwah.
Yeah, there we go.
So,
Here he is.
how was the kids' reaction?
Yes, they were very, very excited. We only told them this morning.
Yeah.
What time did you pick him up?
About midday, about 12:30.
Sweet.
He's been home with us for a little while. Yeah. You tired? A bit to bed. Yeah. Come on then.
Right. See you later, Hudson.
You wave to everyone. Bye.
Bye. Yeah, that's it. I'm moving to Southampton now.
Okay.
Right, we got the notes.
I believe so.
I haven't done an intro for a while. Do you want me to do this one?
Yeah, go for it.
I need to refill my beer. Because otherwise, I'm not going to have any beer. And fucking what kind of podcast would it be if we didn't have beer?
Right. Who have we got in the chat already?
No one.
No, there's some people there. We got Thomas,
I can't see any
Brett
chat.
Simmons, and Joost.
Oh, there we go.
Good evening to you all.
Mrs. just informed me he's not long done a shit in the kitchen. So that was good.
So your exit to the office for podcasting was well timed.
Excellent. Yeah, excellent timing on my part.
Right then. Owen, Audacity.
Audacity. Give me 2 seconds.
Oh, by the way, Owen.
Sorry, mate. I can't see that. I've got all manner of windows open right now. Hold on. What is it? Oh, you did order one. Nice.
Chris
No,
on the
that's
chat
it.
says Happy New Year and very cute puppy.
Who's that?
Chris Woofenden.
Chris. Right, I need to get onto the live stream. Let's see what's going on.
Oh, big Gaza Hughes. Gary, I've got to ask, mate, are you an Everton fan or a Scum fan? Because it might change the dynamic of our relationship, you see.
Chris pretending he's got any interest in football whatsoever again.
We all know
Oh,
it's a ruse.
no, he's a Scum fan.
We all know it's a ruse.
Just as I was starting to like you, Gary.
Gally. Why do you say that? Oh, you were a scouser. Galley.
Yeah,
It sounded like it.
Galley
Yeah,
lad.
Galley.
The bin dippers. I'm not being funny. We didn't pay what you did for a certain crappy defender. Anyway,
La 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 la.
shall we get this show on the road so we can get this one done so I can drink more beer?
Oh,
Yeah. I mean, this isn't going to stop you drinking beer, by the way. It shouldn't do.
yeah, that's kind of
So
part and
drink
parcel.
as much as you want.
Have I been doing it wrong this whole time?
Yeah.
No, you've been doing it. You've been doing it very, very right, Tricky.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Some might say a little bit too right.
a little bit too enthusiastically at times, perhaps.
Right then.
Maybe we've got some
Strap
notes. Have we not?
I'm going to do the
Yeah, I've got
intro.
notes. Okay.
Audacity, you
Count
ready
us
to
in.
go? Owen?
Yeah, mine is ready to roll. Yeah.
Okay. 3, 2, 1, click. Quick check on the mic. Yep, cool. We've got
Check,
some
check,
waveform.
testing. Yeah, it's all good.
Have you got waveform, Owen?
Yeah, mate. Yeah, I checked mine. Yeah, all good.
Okay.
Waves are forming.
The waves are forming. Give me a minute or two and I'll... Why the hell is that going?
Oh, Tricky, did you set up a new document for... I did set up a document for the notes.
Oh, did you?
Yeah, maybe you didn't clock it.
Sorry, yeah.
No worries. I didn't get very far, to be fair. I got as far as, what are we drinking?
Ah, good. Detailed.
Yeah, very.
So Chris Senior, the Patreon, is Chris Woofenden.
Aha,
He
okay.
says it's a long story with the different
Okay.
name, but yeah. It's
Good
probably...
evening, Chris.
Yeah. Cheers, buddy.
Welcome, Chris, to the live podcast. It's much the same as the normal podcast.
Just with more burping and farting. And...
Yeah, burps,
Yeah.
farts, and vaping noises.
Not from me, you cheeky twat.
And you do get to see this cool on-air sign. And
And a dog.
yeah, and a puppy.
The brew pup.
The new brew pup, yeah.
Right then. Strap in. We're going to do the intro.
Go nuts. Just as soon as I've stopped making loads of noise.
Get ready to go. Bang.
Yeah, I'll just turn my mic.
Just starts moving the drum kit
Fucking
around.
amateurs. Right.
Hold on, listen. Oh, that wasn't that loud.
Okay. Here we go then. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to episode 59 of the Hop Edition podcast. Today is going to be a relatively short episode for us, where we are discussing the delivery of competition beers in a successful manner. As you may know, last summer we did a homebrewing competition in association with Unity Brewing and a whole host of other amazing sponsors. Brewkeg Tap, Brew Day, the Malt Miller. There were loads of other... Yakima Chief Hops. There were loads of other people involved in it. Feel free to go back and check out some of our posts about that or even listen to the episode. But yeah, this is where we're going to talk about how it is that we think you can get those beers to those competitions in a successful manner and in peak condition. Now, ordinarily at this point, what we would do is we would run through and we would talk about Patreons and stuff like that. So I'm going to talk about a very specific Patreon because we have a gentleman by the name of Liam Poole who has signed up, and he is one of our top Patreons. He is our one and only Hop Star Patreon. And that means that he has signed up for us to be able to say, Liam, this podcast is dedicated to you.
Whoop, whoop, whoop,
Because-
whoop, whoop.
You have signed up. You are supporting the podcast in the best way that you can. And that is by listening to us, by telling us that you appreciate what we're doing, and by supporting us through the Patreon system, allowing us to give you some fantastic content and allowing us to continue doing what we know that you guys love, and that is talking bollocks, getting drunk and shouting tits, or something like that. Anyway, but we don't want to ignore the rest of our Patreons. As such, scrolling along the bottom of the window on the live chat right now, we have a list of all of our Patreons, and we love every single one of you, especially Aussie Paul Robinson, and Aussie Rob, because I'm feeling love for our Antipodean brethren right now. But everybody who's on there, we love you all. You're all amazing. You're all wonderful humans. But big thanks especially go out to Liam and to our podcast sponsor, Brewkeg Tap, for making everything amazing. I mean, Johnny at Brewkeg Tap has supported us now for going on 6 months, maybe 7 months. And we just really appreciate everything that everybody's doing to help us keep doing this and giving you guys the information. Now, I personally think that this particular podcast is going to be incredibly important because of the number of... How many competitions did we say there were that were coming up in the next 4 months, Tricky?
Quite a few. There's 3 sort of BJCP ones, or fairly big BJCP ones, and possibly there's another Malt Miller one going as well. I think there's a sour beer. It's is it Pastore one?
No, it might be the Pastore one.
Brett might have said something about being entered into that one, but yeah, we thought we'd do a few little updates as a kind of little mini segment on the pod for various things that are going on, as well as the main topic, which in this case, obviously, the packaging of beers for competition and so on. So yeah, if you're going to be packaging beers for a competition, it's a good idea to know which ones are going on. So I think the first one coming up, which is literally in a couple of weeks or less, is the Scottish National. And then there's the UK National following in February, and I think Lager Than Life is March time, possibly around about March. So there's 3 that are in quick succession. I think the Scottish one, you'd probably be too late to get in on that, but I think if there's any places that become open on the National and Lager Than Life, that you could potentially get a late entry into a couple of those competitions if you want to. And yeah, it seems like the sort of season for most of the homebrew competitions is in sort of winter, early springtime, rather than the middle of summer like some people seem to choose. Moving swiftly on.
Every day's a school day, Tricky.
What kind of an idiot would run a competition on the hottest weekend of the year that we had so far that year?
You'd have to be crazy, right?
You'd have to be a complete nutcase, and to do it in a place right down on the south coast like Southampton. Who'd do that?
Well, the weather was nice though, wasn't it?
It was banging, mate. Barbecue was really good as well. So we've done thanks to our Patreons. So, gentlemen, quickly, what are we drinking? I'm going to go to the man with the red light himself, Mr. OJ Puckett.
Boom. Right, I'm drinking my latest brew, my latest creation, which is the mash hopped Thiel release beer.
Oh, interesting.
This is loosely based on the grist from Cumflux. I undershot it slightly, so it came in slightly more sessionable. I think it came in about 4.6. I mashed with, can't remember exactly how much it was, about 120 grams of Cascade. Bagged it up in a kind of hop sock, put that in the mash. And then the rest is all Nelson Savin. So Nelson in the Whirlpool and then Nelson in the dry hop. And it's really, really interesting. It's not super pungent, but it's definitely got like quite a intense aroma to it. It's not like Nipa level, but it's definitely got some, like, I would describe probably different aromas in it to if I hadn't used mash hopping and the Thiel release yeast. I can't say that definitively because it's pretty subjective in the fact that I've only done this one beer. I have no comparator, so I could just be imagining it.
You don't have a control beer to compare to?
No, sorry.
Come on, Owen, up your game, son.
Yeah.
To be honest, you've schoolboyed that one as well, Owen, because
really
you've changed 2 variables.
2 variables I've added there, yeah. But it's it's got a really beautiful kind of rose, kind of passion fruit-esque, slightly peachy kind of aroma to it. Touch of lime in there. It drinks really nicely. I've been hitting the tap hard.
Have you been drinking the beer though?
Yes, I have been drinking the beer.
Sounds good.
Yeah, it's tasty. If you guys are lucky, I might even send you a bottle.
We can but hope.
Yeah, so I'm pleased with it. I think I used which yeast was it? Was the WHC thiol release yeast? I can't remember.
Is
the
it
yeast
Hop
is called.
Unlock? Or there's
Hop Unlock. That's
they've got
it.
a couple of versions. Yeah, because I've
No,
got a
they've only
bag of
got
that
the
in the
one.
fridge myself to
They've
try
only got
out,
the one.
so.
Yeah.
Oh no,
or
it's White Labs have got one out as well or something, have they? I think.
Yes, White Labs have
I'm
one
thinking
too.
Malt Miller having two different ones, but they're different companies.
Yeah. So there are a few around now, which is quite exciting, and I think that's kind of a theme that we've been talking about as far back as probably the Track podcast, right? I think we talked to Matt about that, didn't we? Yeah, and then we talked to Andrew about it as well from Lallemand, and and we're kind of seeing some products come out in the market where you can actually start to do that process. Not necessarily seeing it overtaking the commercial beer scene right now, although I did predict that you'd start to see a lot more of it. I've seen a few bits here and there of people sort of testing this stuff out. Mash hopping's not a new thing, right? They've been doing that for
millennia.
Quite a long time. But of course, the thiol release thing is probably the newer aspect of it. Although when we looked at some of the data from the possibly the White Labs website that did some testing around kind of certain yeast strains that tend to release thiols more so than others. But the specific thiol releasing like engineered yeasts punch way above their weight in comparison to just standard yeast, as I understand it.
That is pretty cool.
There's quite an interesting article if you are interested that Scott Janisch wrote. Take it with a grain of salt. He writes with a certain style. It may not always be scientifically backed up. But he made some interesting observations just around what was quite interesting for what I read was the fact that they found that adding Whirlpool as well as adding dry hops in quite a few different circumstances actually impacted on the result and the outcome that you got from the thiol releasing mash hopping process, as opposed to adding to it, which you would imagine. You'd imagine it's kind of like, oh, you're definitely going to boost the aroma, you're definitely going to boost the flavour by throwing in a Whirlpool and adding massive dry hop. In actual fact, the opposite was true. So that was kind of interesting.
Cool.
Yeah, there you go. So
that's hit one more bit of our news of the brew section.
It has. We're kind of into the advanced thiol releasing yeast bit already.
Yeah, we are.
Come on then, Tricky.
There we go.
I have got a beer that I'm calling the beer formerly known as IPL, because nowadays all the marketing knobs are calling them cold IPAs instead, which I've read various articles which try and elaborate on the difference between the two, and I think it's just complete marketing bullshit, basically. It's the same fucking thing, really.
Can we not just call it a Baltic IPA?
Baltic IPA could work, yeah. That would be a good one for the marketing men to dry hump the fuck out of, wouldn't it? So, yeah. So anyway, basically, it's a essentially a West Coast IPA that's been fermented with 3470 cold, and that's it really. So I did put a little bit of in the grist, kept it quite light. So you can see it's pretty light coloured beer. I put a little bit of rice in the grist just to really sort of lighten it up and keep it nice and crispy. Seems to have worked reasonably well. Simcoe Centennial Columbus hop, so it's proper classic kind of West Coast hops in there. Yeah, it's quite nice, quite resiny, quite piney. Nice bit of cat piss for Chris there when I send it to him as well.
Did you dry hop it, Tricky?
I did. It was a fairly restrained dry hop though. Oh, there was a bit of Cascade in the dry hop as well because I was kind of following a little bit of the survivables guidance that we talked to Robbie about in terms of like Cascade being much more effective as a dry hop and things like Centennial. I don't think Columbus was actually in that survivables list, but I'm pretty sure that Columbus will be one of the hops that's got quite a lot of survivables because it's very potent, or to me it seems very potent wherever you put it in the hop schedule. So yeah, Columbus and Centennial sort of in the late boil, and then Simcoe and all of them in, apart from Cascade in the whirlpool, and then Simcoe and Cascade in the dry hop. So yeah, pretty old school kind of hopping. But yeah, I was going for that West Coast vibe. So it's really nice.
Just out of pure curiosity, whilst we're bagging the cold/Baltic IPA bollocks, what's the fucking difference between that and an IPL and a well-hop lager? What's the fucking difference?
That's what I'm saying. There is no difference.
Nothing. There's fucking no difference.
No, let's start to like a heavily hopped lager,
which I haven't been making for the last 2.5 fucking years.
Is probably going to predominantly like head towards the noble hopping.
Yeah,
only if you're a muppet.
Hoppy lager can be pretty like, you know, that's a pretty wide ranging.
But if you talk about that, well, and an IPL is really like what you've done is made a lager and then massively dry hopped it with some sort of a New World American, Australia, New Zealand hop, right? Then that is, as I understand it, a cold IPA. Or as Derek Hodges suggested, a Scottish summer IPA. So that's another one for the marketing department.
Yeah, that's another new name for the same thing.
It's niche. It might work in the niche. The geography of Scotland.
Well, this is. Sorry, Tricky. Are you done?
I am done. You go ahead.
This is version 7 of low ABV.
Oh, looking clear.
This is the final version. I think. I don't think I'm gonna change anything else. I think that's pretty much bang on where I want it. 2.4%. Drinks like about 4.5. Fucking stunner.
Nice.
And it's
2.4%.
Yes. Very, very, very enjoyable. I mean, probably half, maybe 2/3 of the keg's already gone.
The fact that you're a version 7, and it's like, well, how many of those?
How have you done 7 versions of that?
How
beer
many
already?
How many have you drain poured?
1.
Just 1. So you're actually on version 6.
No, it's version 7 because I kegged it, but it ended up down the drain because it wasn't where I wanted it to be. I had a chance to brew, so I needed to have a keg spare.
Have you actually drunk all of those before you?
I personally have not drunk all of those. No.
Right.
But
even at 2 and a bit %, that would still probably be a little bit unhealthy.
No, I've had some mates come round to help me with that one. Right. And they have absolutely smashed the bollocks off of it.
The thing is, you could literally drink like 8 pints of that.
Yeah.
And be like, I'm a little bit merry.
Yeah, I'm literally
very slightly.
I'm just
slightly merry.
It's fucking
now
wonderful.
I can't physically drink anymore.
Yeah, I'm really bloated.
I'll be honest with you. The main reason why version 5 went as fast as it did is because I didn't quite carb it up as highly as I could.
Oh, really?
It only ended up at about 2. I think I calculated to about 2.15 volumes. Okay. It wasn't very fizzy at all, and it just went down like water.
Did that affect the body though? Did it?
No, not really.
Thinner?
No, not really. Nice. Not really. Not with that one. Nice. 30% of the grist is either wheat or malted oats.
Nice. Well, before you tell us too much, because our plan is to cover this subject in more detail and in
Okay,
depth.
in other words, shut the fuck up, fat boy, right?
No, probably not the way I would have put it, Chris. But I was just going to sort of say, don't divulge all the secrets.
Yeah, I
'cause,
think it was more sort of saying keep your powder dry for that episode
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
coming later.
All right, I got it. Shut the fuck up, fat boy. I got you, man. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Look, put your dick back in your pants, sorry.
I'm not wearing any pants. So the shed's
a
lovely
thought.
and warm. So yeah, that's my beer, and I'm absolutely stoked on it. It's wonderful. It drinks really, really well. Doesn't drink as easily as you'd think it would for 2.5 because of the body of the beer, but it drinks really, really well. It makes you go back for more. There's a really good kick of bitterness.
That's one of the key pillars, right? To quality low ABV beer, isn't it? It's body.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that I will say is, for my palate personally, and for my friends who keep coming around and helping me drink the beers when I tell them there's a fresh keg on, is the hop choice will blow your mind as to what we found works well with this particular type of beer that I've personally made. I mean, there's other low ABV beers where obviously different hop types will work, but for this particular one, it's a very, very, very specific hop that we found just makes everybody happy. And it's English.
Nice. Like that.
And it's fruity.
Nice.
So yeah, there we go.
Right. So we had a couple of other things just to talk about as far as our sort of news updates for current affairs in the homebrew scene. Notable product releases. We've already talked about File releasing yeast. So there's lots of, not lots, but there's a few different versions of those out and about now that you can try out. And Owen's obviously already done that. Laumon's Nova Lager, which I think we briefly mentioned on the pod with Andrew Patterson, but it wasn't out at that point, is now available in homebrew size packs, so you can get your hands on that. I don't know if anybody in the chat has had a chance to try that one out yet, but do let us know. I'm hoping that if Andy will answer any of my emails to him, that I might get some to try out at some point soon to do some video stuff with, and maybe even some podcasts as well.
And the key feature there being that is a lager yeast that is designed to avoid sulfur production.
And it's hybridized with an ale yeast, so it will ferment super quick as well, and will also work pretty good at high temperatures. Not high temperatures, but ale temperatures. So I think quick turnaround, much less likely to produce kind of off flavors and things like that. From what Andy was saying to me when I've spoken to him about it after the pod, the almost total lack of sulfur production might make it not necessarily the best choice for certain styles. So if you want, I think a really, kind of classic German Pilsner, for example, where a little bit of a sulfur note might be kind of useful to give it, that extra kind of crispness and everything. It's not necessarily, obviously not going to deliver that if there's no sulfur production at all. So he was kind of saying that, though sort of amber and darker lagers, it works really well with, and just a sort of lighter lager styles where you're not really looking for quite as much character from the yeast as such. So that's an interesting one. You could pair that up with some new German Pilsner malt that I think Malt Miller have just brought out as well, which I saw in one of their newsletters. Isaria or Isaria, I don't know how to say it, but it's a sort of heritage German malt. So it seems like there's a few heritage European malts starting to come out now, as well as we've seen a few from UK maltings as well. It seems like some of the European maltings are getting on the bandwagon with that. You will need to take out a small mortgage in order to buy that.
Cheap malt, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, I ordered 150 kilos of that the moment it came up. Yeah, totally.
I ordered 150 grams, and I'm skint now.
You got free delivery though.
Basically, boys, for those of you thinking about going down the Isaria route, it's 92 quid a sack.
Wow, that is
To be fair, I don't think they're even
absolutely
selling it in the 25 kilo
insane.
stack, so they probably realised that people might run in terror if they saw that price. So
92
by the
quid.
kilo.
That's
It's,
bonkers.
Did you
yeah, it's
realise that's
expensive.
50 kilos of malt and a kilo of Citra if you buy it from Get a Brewed and from Crafty Maltsters?
Yeah. I think when you work that through, let's imagine 25 kilos, that's probably what, 5, maybe 6 batches, depending on your ABV. So you're talking like 15, 20 quid just in malt.
Yep.
That's gourmet shit. It is.
I mean, if that shit don't come with a Michelin star, I ain't fucking buying it.
Yeah. Okay. That's
Yeah.
interesting.
So the other point that we had on the list for the sort of current news was any sort of interesting research or content. I don't know if you guys came across anything, but one video that I did see on YouTube recently, which I thought was quite interesting, was Homebrew Network, which is the Aussie guy, Gavin, I think his name is. He's also goes by the nickname Gash, I think, which is okay. But
Unfortunate.
yeah, unfortunate maybe, but anyway. So he did a video looking at some recent research into various dry hopping methods and how they affect haze or levels of haze. There was some I can't remember where the research was actually from originally, but there was some quite interesting stuff in there about first of all, like specific hop varieties having a different impact on the level of haze that was in the beers. And I think that there was stuff like Galaxy and Citra, and maybe there was another Australian or New Zealand one, which were significantly more haze producing than other hops, which I
Is it Vic
never
Secret?
thought. Might have been, yeah, that rings a bell. It might have been that, or maybe possibly Eclipse or something like that. It was one of the newer ones anyway.
I've found Vic Secret gives you like soup beers.
Yeah, so it's
with
maybe
certain
something
yeasts.
you might have sort of seen and not figured that might have been down to the hops, but apparently that can be a factor. And the other main thing that it brought up was that the point at which you dry hop in terms of how active the yeast is will also have an impact as well, so that it will basically, I think generally speaking, the earlier it went in, so the more of the active fermentation it was sort of involved in, the more likely the haze was to drop out, which kind of makes sense because it's going to be getting pulled down out of suspension with the yeast and proteins and everything else that's floating around, I guess, and kind of binding onto those a bit more, rather than when it's all already fallen out and then your hops going afterwards, I guess, might be one of the reasons behind that, perhaps. Or there might be some more advanced scientific stuff going on that I don't fully understand. But I think that one was probably a little bit less surprising, but still, useful information. So I guess where you're dry hopping and maybe you do want to get more clarity, there's some information there that can help with that. So if you're trying to do like a Westie or something that's maybe you want a little bit more clarity in, perhaps putting it in while the yeast is still going a little bit might be a good idea to help with that. Whereas if you're going for a full-on Merc bomb, get a really big late addition, even if you are still doing active fermentation, dry hopping will help to get some of that real thick kind of soupy opaqueness into the beer. So yeah,
on that point, I've always found Sabro to be a proper Merc hop.
It's quite oily though, Sabro, isn't it?
Galaxy as well, I think, is quite.
Yeah.
Citra Galaxy combo is
might
super
this
Merc
have some sort of relevance towards beta acid concentrations as far as murkiness goes then? Because Galaxy's famous for it.
Possibly.
Might have something to do with the beta I don't know. That deserves some research, that does.
There's some sort of protein, yeast protein, hop variable going on, isn't there? Would be my guess.
We'll see.
Coming from someone that knows.
Yeah, anyway, the Homebrew Network was the channel that was on, and the video is called Dry Hopping Hazies and Why You're Doing It Wrong. That is...
he's a good bloke as well.
Yeah,
He's good people. He's very fucking funny at times.
yeah,
I like him
it's a good channel actually to follow.
very much so.
So yeah, go and have a look at that if you haven't already subscribed.
He's very
So
honest.
Owen,
Yeah.
you've just put something else in there.
Yeah, so I think worth noting that we've seen some craft breweries close at the end of 2022. I think most notably Wild Beer Company, which was a bit of a surprise. I think they were a well-established brewery producing some excellent beer, and really sad to see them turn the key. Even with, I think, probably some investors, they crowdfunded at some point, had a pretty well-established distribution network. But I was just having a look at some, there's just an enormous amount of breweries closing at the moment. It's tough out there. And I think the key message there is just support your local breweries. If you want them to hang around, go support them. I know we're home brewers, but if you're anything like me and Trekkie, probably less so. I'll put Chris in this camp too. We drink a fair bit of commercial beer, but quality commercial beer, and we tend to order directly from breweries. Is support your favorite breweries, get in there and order some beer, and just help them out. I think if everyone did that, we're going to see some survival through this year, because I think it's going to be really tough.
Yeah, they won't be the last, will they? Sure.
No, they won't. They won't at all. I don't think the government's going to help them out in any way. I saw S43 have closed as well.
Oh, have they?
Yeah.
Shit, that's a real shame as well, because they're relatively new and they were doing some really, really good stuff.
They were.
It was one of my favourite Thunderbirds, that was.
And there's a huge list that I've managed to find here. Bad Company, I've heard of them.
Yeah, Bad Company, yeah.
Drink a huge amount of their beer, but yeah, lots and lots of breweries closing down, which is a bit of a shame. So there's a bit of negative news just to balance out some of the positives.
We got to bring it all, man. We got to bring it all. We got to bring the good and the bad, unfortunately, because that's the way that we roll. You get nothing but real, and
Unbiased.
not with two E's.
That's it.
So,
right, shall we cut to the chase and get on to the actual?
Yeah, I mean, we're only half an hour in. We've not yet discussed.
It's now. We're going to do a really short pod today, guys, and we're half an hour before
if this takes us more than 45 minutes to do this next section,
to be fair, there's not much left to talk about, so it should be quick.
Right then.
Yeah, so getting beers to competition. I guess we can start off with the main issues that will potentially be affecting beers, that is going to make what gets judged at the competition less palatable than what it started out as when you sent it off. So, yeah, Chris, do you want to go through some of those? Because I'll just get slaughtered if I pronounce any of these words wrong. So I'll let you do it.
Let's hand over to the scientist for the sciencey bit. Right. Okay. So the main issues that are relating to the packaging of your beer for competition. Now, bearing in mind, it's not purely the packaging that contributes to the issues that you're going to have when you package your beer. Okay. Obviously, the big one is oxidation. I would recommend a ITAP, because I've found no issues whatsoever with my ITAP. There are other things available on the market. Go and watch anything by Dr. Hans. He's always making something. He'll have probably come up with some solution using, I know, a sponge, an animal's intestine, and a reindeer horn, which will get beer into a bottle with zero oxygen. But there are many, many different ways to stop that oxidation occurring. My personal favorite is to use science to do it. So use some sort of oxygen scrubber, like a bit of a Camden tablet, vitamin A. I think, is it vitamin A or vitamin C?
Ascorbic acid.
Ascorbic acid. I can't remember which vitamin that is. I've had a few beers, even though they are only 2.5%.
Vitamin C. I think you can use vitamin C as well.
Yeah, that's ascorbic acid.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you can reduce it using chemical means, but the best way to reduce it is to simply not fucking let it in there in the first place. So get a decent transfer method set up for actually getting your beers into bottles. And if you bottle conditioning, just fucking stop and get some kegs. Unless you're doing impy stouts, in which case definitely keep bottling because they're just a pain in the ass.
I mean, it's a good point to raise, though, like the whole sort of bottle conditioning versus kind of keg argument. I mean, there's going to be different styles where bottle conditioning might be more appropriate and actually be something that's kind of expected as part of the delivery of that beer. In some cases, but there's obviously also styles where
Wits
bottle
and
conditioning
weights.
is, there's other examples where bottle conditioning is just really putting a lot of potential issues in front of you as far as the whole oxidation side of things and everything else, because it's going to be quite difficult to get it into the bottle in any kind of like closed sense in terms of stopping the oxygen getting introduced at some point through that process.
It is.
So
It is. I'd agree
There
with
was,
you there, Tricky.
in my humble opinion, I haven't bottle conditioned ever since I bought kegs, and that was probably about 4 years ago. But there are certain styles that I would bottle condition a beer, and those would probably be Belgian styles.
Yep.
And anything that has Brett in it, I'd be reasonably comfortable, because Brett in itself would kind of scavenge oxygen in itself, because it will continue fermentation in the bottle. Maybe in pea stouts I might, but I'd probably prefer to carb those up in a keg and bottle them from there. But otherwise, just go to kegs. I think it's an awful lot easier.
It's
I'm in the
much
same boat.
easier. It's much easier. You know what I mean? And it also avoids the oxidation kind of thing. I want to get through these as far as the chemical side of it goes. Acetaldehyde is a huge one. There's reasons for that. The main reason why you're going to get acetaldehyde is if your beer hasn't reached like terminal gravity before you bottle it to get it to shipped off, or your primary fermentation was fucked and you didn't put enough yeast in, or they weren't healthy enough, or there wasn't enough nutrients for your yeast in there. You've got to remember, if you're running multiple generations, you need to use nutrient, because whilst, yes, there are sufficient nutrients within your malt bill and within the actual grain that's going in that you're extracting from, you've got to add in. It's like you can live on McDonald's, but do you really fucking want to? That's kind of the thing. So acetaldehyde's a major issue. Nobody wants that green apple flavor. I'm fucking sick to death of it, and I've only done one competition. Diacetyl's another one. Diacetyl's a major issue because people simply are not fucking boiling their wort hard enough, right? Put it this way. If you see a ripple on the surface, that is not a boil. Is it?
You're talking about DMS, yeah.
Oh, fuck. I always get those two mixed up. But DMS is a big one as well. We don't want that either.
Well, let's talk about DMS.
Let's talk about DMS.
Carry on with DMS.
So with DMS, essentially you're after removing a precursor. Now there's an enzyme that you can use, but SMM, which I can't remember what it actually is. SMM is something that you do not want in your beer. You have to boil that shit hard to get rid of it. So these are all steps that are occurring before you're even packaging the beer. Okay. With SMM, if you've got a ripple on the surface of your wort in your brew kettle, that is not a boil. Okay. To be a boil, it has to roll. So you have to have a movement. And from what I've worked out on my kettle, it's 50-litre kettle. It's roughly that wide. Okay. Which isn't very scientific because none of you have me to scale, but call it between 18 and 20 inches wide. Okay. You have to have movement on the surface, I've found, of at least 3/4 of an inch. Okay. A little fucking ripple that looks like somebody's farting underneath a bathtub is not enough. You want a proper fucking movement of that surface. And you want, for want of a better term, some foaming at the beginning. Okay.
It's a boil.
You need a fucking
not a simmer.
Exactly. Okay. Otherwise, you are not driving those precursors out in order to remove a lot of these issues. So, somebody tell me about diacetyl.
So, diacetyl is the buttery kind of flavor that typically you'll find a lot more in lagers. very common in lagers. We talk about diacetyl rests. Less common with ale yeasts, but it can occur as a result of dry hopping. So you can tend to get something called hop creep, which is probably the thing that tends to occur and why we tend to see diacetyl in competition beers from beers that have been dry hopped, right, and then packaged, and then they tend to warm up, and then there tends to be a little bit of a re-fermentation happening in the bottle because there are certain enzymes within hops that can break down certain sugars, not enormously, but enough for the yeast to be able to continue fermentation. I don't know, I'm spitballing here as to whether dropping your yeast off the beer before you dry hop could help. So you're potentially lowering a little bit of a yeast count in there. Or it's just ensuring that you've done a stable dry hop. And I think really it's going to be a lot about trying to keep your beers in a good condition, which I think it will get onto, but that's probably one of the hardest aspects of sending beers into competition, particularly in our experience and the fact that we did it in the summertime, probably easier in wintertime.
Yeah.
Because, your beer's sat in the mail system and it's going to be, either sat in a warm environment or a cold environment. You're going to want it sat in a cold environment, and you're going to likely to see less re-fermentation happening in the bottle.
I agree
definitely.
with you.
Those are my thoughts.
I agree with you.
I think both of those, there's an element of knowing your ingredients as well. So with the thing about the boil, vigor, like you might get away with a less vigorous boil with a lot of malts that are, modern, highly modified, have less precursors in them, and then you'll switch up your malt to something else that's maybe a little bit more heritage or a little bit older, and then boom, you've got like cabbage soup on your hands with DMS, or you've for
Butterscotch.
like diacetyl, if you start using a yeast that's more prone to diacetyl, then you may suddenly find that that's an issue, because the sort of we'll talk a little bit more about kind of fermentation schedules and everything as we go on. But if you're rushing things through because you're used to something like USO5 or whatever that gets the job done, usually within a week, and then everything's fine, and then you switch up the yeast and you're trying to push it through on the same sort of schedule. Maybe you're doing that dry hop and you want to package quickly after the dry hop, so you're not quite giving it enough time. That can all play into it as well. So it's about knowing those ingredients as far as like malts, certainly for things like DMS, and then also like yeast and how that performs. And some ale yeast may still need that kind of diacetyl rest just to make sure and give them a bit of a chance to drive off those precursors. And again, like lager yeast, different ones will be more prone to it. So things like the Nova lager yeast that we've talked about, I guess one of the other things they've probably aimed for with that, in terms of combining it with an ale yeast, is to try and reduce the risk of diacetyl, as well as the sulfur production and things like that as well. So yeah,
I'm wondering how they managed to get them to fuck. I mean,
Well,
what did they do? Do we just put them in a warm room together and just like play some Marvin Gaye?
Mood Lighting and Barry White, I'm going for.
I think it's probably what it is, to be fair. Right. Anyway, moving away. So,
I think there was a couple of points.
Volume.
Actually, I just wanted to add a couple of points. I think the re-fermentation in bottle is probably one of the biggest issues that you're likely to see, and will cause off flavors in your beer. Now, when we if we context that into the competition framework, particularly if it's a BJCP competition, or if it's not, doesn't really matter. But one of the things that the judges are going to be looking for off the bat is going to be those off flavors we've already mentioned, and any good beer judge will be able to smell a beer and probably pick up on those 3 or 4 things within like that. You'll pick them up super fast, and if those flaws are in there, it doesn't matter how good your hop aroma is, right? Your beer's gonna get judged badly. because it's considered a flaw, right? And it's just considered a bad fermentation flaw. And I think re-fermentation in the bottle is probably one of in my mind, probably the most contributing factors. So the beer can taste great out your tap before you go bottling that beer and sending it off to competition. But if, for example, you took that beer off the yeast too quickly, you tried to turn this beer around in a week, right? And it's actually turns out that it's not quite finished fermentation, you are screwed, right? So just the key message there is rush it. Don't rush a beer, especially if you know you're brewing a beer for a competition, is I would recommend leaving that beer on the yeast before you even do any kind of dry hop or anything for at least 2 weeks. Just to make sure everything's, and if it's a lager, probably even longer. It just gives you some insurance. And then when it comes to like D rests and diacetyl rests, is, I generally make sure that even if it's an ale, I will bump it up by 2 degrees for a day or two, just as insurance, And if you're doing it on a lager, you absolutely have to do that, in my experience. So that's a key one to avoid. Also, from an oxidation perspective, is I would favour glass bottles over PET bottles. I find PET bottles, especially if you've reused them a number of times, are pretty unreliable. They don't seal well. One of the biggest things that I find with beer that I can get, like beer mail and stuff like that, sometimes I go to open one and the cap just comes off super easy. If you're going to put it in PET bowls, do whatever your packaging process is, screw it on as tight as you can, then come back like 10, 15 minutes later and you'll find you'll be able to screw it on harder. And that secondary tightening of the lid, I think, really helps to keep the beer from potentially getting any kind of gas movement.
No, absolutely. I think the double tightening technique is one that people need to be aware of, because it is very, very useful. But at the same time, I understand why people don't want to spend money on PET bottles and they get beer mail and they can just reuse them and all that lot. And I understand, money short, times are hard. It's your fucking Christmas card. I get it. But surely there has to be an element of, I want my beer to get there in the best possible state that it can. I'll drop 15 quid on a pack of 24 Coopers bottles and send it in them. Or however much they are, because I pay a lot less than 25 quid for 12 bottles or 24 bottles or whatever. Surely you just put new ones in, especially if you've got a beer that you genuinely believe could be in the shout for a win. You would.
Well, I think that's where the question comes in as to whether it's worthy for competition beers to step that up to glass bottles as well, rather than going with the plastic, because we've seen the Malt Miller in their recent competitions have explicitly commented on the difference in standard generally between the stuff they've received that's in plastic versus glass bottles, and essentially saying that the majority of the stuff in glass was superior to the stuff that was sent in plastic. I mean, there's obviously so many variables that go into this that I think if you are, if you're bottling in plastic using fully closed, fermentation and transfer and all the rest of it, and something like an ITAP for proper kind of closed packaging as well, oxygen-free packaging, then you can still get good results with plastic bottles. I mean, I've basically sent all of my competition beers exclusively in plastic bottles, and I've had a few beers place. But it does make me think, well, if I put them into glass, maybe some of the beers that didn't arrive in such good condition could have done better, and perhaps some of the ones that placed might have placed a little bit higher, maybe. I don't know. So it might be something that I'd end up trying out in the future, is to go down glass bottles for competition entries. And I've also kind of started thinking, well, if there's this general idea that glass is better than plastic anyway, do you want a judge to be picking up your bottle, seeing that it's in plastic and having a preconceived idea that it might You know,
Yeah.
because I mean, there is an element of psychology there for when people are going to be judging the beers that they might sort of
Everybody judges.
have their idea made up about it before it's actually even out of the bottle. If they perceive the packaging process has been used to it as inferior than using a glass bottle. But you know, there's without a doubt there are obviously advantages for glass bottles over plastic in terms of them actually just being more impervious to, you know, oxygen ingress and all the rest of it. So I think it's one of those things where it's not, I don't think it's as clear cut as saying like don't bother sending anything in plastic because your beer is never going to do well, because I know for a fact that's not the case. I've, like I said, exclusively used plastic bottles and had a few beers that have done all right, but yeah, at the end of the day, glass bottles are probably going to be better, as long as they don't get smashed to fucking transit, which is the other risk, you know.
There's so many variables that goes into this process, and we're talking about the ones that you can avoid, but ultimately you cannot avoid the effect. One thing that I will say is, if you're using Every as your courier, just fucking keep the beer at home. Just keep the beer at home. There's no point. Right? Or Yodel. Just keep it at home. Don't even fucking save your money. Don't send it in.
I had some beer mail arrive from Yodel that was sent on probably the second week of December from Andy Clark, and it arrived at the beginning of this week.
And that's how awesome.
That was on a two-day delivery estimate.
To be fair, I'm not sure you can probably rely on the Royal Mail right now, though.
Well, yeah,
by the scenes I've seen at the minute. So, you know, that's always been my chosen route. It's Royal Mail has always been pretty reliable. I think there's a few road bumps at the moment on that, but
I don't think you can rely on any courier at the minute, can you? Let's call it what it is. With the way that the world is at the moment, I don't think you can rely on any courier.
I don't think until we get out of the post-Christmas sort of backlog and now sort of January sales and all the rest of it that's still piling stuff into that system, it's not really going to be back to normal for a good couple of months.
And the winter discontent as well with various, you know, industrial action and all the rest of it going on. But I think it probably is worth paying that extra bit of money to ship glass, package them properly. Glass, ultimately, I think in my mind, is more reliable, more consistent. I think pet bowls, I think, are just a little bit hit and miss. I think sometimes they can be fine and they're great. They're good for beer mail, right? Because, you know, at the end of the day, you just send a beer to your mates, and if a bowl turns up and it's oxidized to fuck, then, you know, well, it's not the end of the world.
Shit happens.
Yeah.
You don't worry about that one. Oxygen, Thomas has just raised a very good point about oxygen absorbing caps. Do you want to know how well they work, Thomas? They fucking don't as soon as they get wet. There we go.
Oh, okay.
That fucks that one right off.
So they have to be stood up.
Yeah.
But
and not transported at all.
You're also capping on foam, so you're immediately going to just get them wet.
I
think
that's
not going to work well, is it?
I think don't work is probably over egging the pudding slightly. It's massively reduced their capabilities when they get wet. And we know that beer is, you know, for some of the stuff that my mates make, about 85% water. The rest of it just happens to be alcohol. But yeah, it's you got to be careful with those kinds of things. They're not as good as you would think they are. I want to cover the last sort of 2 to 3 points. Infection, that again comes down to simply rushing the process and not giving it enough time. Also, it comes down to a lack of general cleanliness, because you've still got to make sure that those bottles are clean. Whatever it is that you're putting the beer into, you have to make sure that is clean. There's also one which I've had personally, I won't say a lot of experience with, but a fair bit of experience with, and that is skunking. Skunking occurs so quickly you would not believe. All right? Go to a pub on a summer's day, get a pint of lager, right? Or whatever it is that you're drinking, get it fresh from the tap, taste it as soon as you put it down on the bar in front of you. Okay? Carry it outside to the beer garden, sit down with whoever you're with, don't touch that beer for about 5-6 minutes. then pick it up and taste it again, and the beer will taste different. Skunking happens that quickly. All right.
And coming back to the plastic bottle discussion, don't use clear orange juice bottles to send your beer.
Tropicana bottles are no bueno. They're not. They're no bueno.
Don't just whether it's glass or plastic, just do not use clear bottles.
Just don't do it. It's not worth it. So I think of everything that we've talked about, one of the main sort of overarching things that covers the vast majority of these is going to be make sure that your fermentation is complete. There is a reason why 2-2-2 is a mantra amongst brewers. 2 weeks in the fermenter, 2 weeks conditioning, 2 weeks in the fermenter, 2 weeks to clear or recarb, and then 2 weeks conditioning before you even drink a beer. All right. So if you're going 3 days thinking it's quike, it'll be done. It might be, but it's going to be better after 2 weeks. Patience is a virtue. All right. It's not a fucking Formula One pit stop. Right. You're not aiming to be in and out in under 3 seconds. Just give it time. Let it do its thing.
She said.
Gazing. Just give it some time. Just make sure that these things are complete before you move on. Now, another thing that I want to say is for those of you who are listening to this podcast who actually organize competitions, and I think all three of us will agree on this, summer competitions are an issue. We've talked about this. Mm-hmm. There is a reason why we've seen as many of these issues as we have, and that is people were transporting beers to us on one of the hottest weeks that we saw last year. The amount of just issues that will have been caused by temperature were a problem. There's a reason why there were people driving to Owen's house to drop the beers off personally. Okay? There's a lot of issues that can occur from temperature and from all of these different bits and bobs and from generally being bounced around and from the transportation process. It's much easier to simply organize a competition when it comes to the winter months or the summer months or the autumn months, when the temperature's more around about that 14, 15 degrees, where, you know, it's not too bad for the beer. But 35, 37 like we did. I mean, I look back on that now and I think, Jesus Christ, why did we do it?
I think ultimately there was a lot of beers that the issues would have been very minor, if not, you know, barely noticeable had they been delivered under normal conditions. Whereas once you put it into a 30, 40 degree sort of, you know, cooker of a delivery van or warehouse, it's just going to accelerate any issues that are pre-existing, or maybe even create some new ones for you that weren't there in the first place. So
absolutely,
it's not ideal, and that's kind of something that's probably more down to the the organizers of competitions rather than the people entering. But I guess if you are entering a competition in any point in the year and it's unusually warm, then maybe considering putting a cool pack in with your beers might be something to think about as well.
Yep. I mean,
belt and braces approach, just try and put it in a sort of, if you're wrapping it up in loads of bubble wrap and other stuff like that, you're creating a little, sort of insulated box anyway. So why not just chuck a cool pack in there? Most of us have loads of them lying around from like yeast that we've bought off of retailers and stuff anyway. So
the big chest
not going to cost you anything usually. Yeah, it's probably got half a dozen in there.
No, I've got way more than half a dozen. Mine's got these little trays that sit on top where you can put different things in, and then you lift them out, and because it's a chest, and then underneath it you've got like the big dumping space. I have one of those like little trays that sits on the top. It's probably 18 inches by about 9 inches wide, maybe 8 inches deep, and it's literally full of the cold packs I got from the malt miller with yeast. I'm happy to ship whatever with them. You know what I mean? It's one of them things.
Cost you anything.
Exactly, it's not going to cost you fuck all, and it's cheap insurance at that point.
I would agree with that. I think particularly if the competition is in the summer months, you want to be taking extra steps to ensure that if you're serious about the competition. But it does seem that actually most competitions are held during the winter months, and I think that probably good reason for that.
Yeah.
Oh, I'd imagine there is, yeah. Right, at that point, can we please have a commercial break? I'm dry.
Yep.
Yeah.
I'm gonna have to go. Excuse me for a second.
Is that the dog needs letting out? See the flat spot on the top of his head?
My money's on the from the headphones. Yeah.
The channel in his hair.
The dog or the children would be my bet for the interruption there.
Right, I'm going to try and
get
ready
this up to go.
I'm not quite. I don't have a glass.
All right, I'll jump in then. So,
go on then.
Mentioned in the chat by our friend Chris, Duration Brewing. This is Little Fanfare, which is their 3.8% Grisette.
I never ordered that one.
You said you tried it last time. I mentioned it when we were.
Let me check. Are you sure? Let me check. I've got my Gmail up in front of me.
It seems like the type of beer that you would have added to the order if you'd seen it.
Probably would have done, to be fair.
So anyway, Grisette was a fairly new beer to me until earlier in the year, or earlier in last year, not earlier in this year. I think I got given a can of Grisette as a sort of parting gift from one of the stands at London Craft Beer Festival, actually, randomly, and I really enjoyed it. So since then, whenever I've seen them available anywhere, I've made a point of trying to order them.
No, I did. I had 2 cans of it.
You did have it, yeah. I thought so. Grisettes are basically like a sort of table beer kind of saison. So it's like a very light, low ABV version of a saison. The spicy phenolic kind of expression from the yeast is a little bit less muted, which is a little bit more muted even. Which is something that I'm quite keen on as well, because I do find that the really spicy saisons are a little bit much for me sometimes. So generally they'll be just a little bit more subtle in terms of the yeast kind of character. Very light, very dry, quite highly carbonated. Basically super refreshing, kind of drinkable. Table beer is essentially the idea behind them. I think the origin story is that they were like, was it like some sort of Belgian miners or something like that? This was like the beer that was brewed for them when they came out of work or anything. But anyway, that's the beer. As you can see, it is pretty well carbonated. Big old head on there, super light, slight haze to it. Duration generally do a pretty good job of doing kind of like authentic European style brews like this, so kind of trusting that their version of it will be pretty on point. Not sure if there's any information on what specific ingredients or hops are in there. Can't see any, but anyway, so yeah. There's not a huge amount of aroma on it. It does smell like a sort of very light saison-y kind of European pale ale kind of vibe going on there.
Catch me up, Tricky. What is it?
Mate, this is fun. The history of the Grisette is amazing.
It's a Grisette by Duration, Little Fanfare.
Oh, nice. I'm not sure if I've had that.
So there is a little bit of that saison character there. So there is some phenolic, sort of spicy, peppery notes in there, but it is quite subtle, quite subdued.
Nice
citrusy flavor to it, and just like the carbonation is just like nice. So even though it's only 3.8%, that kind of carbonation really sort of lifts it in terms of the sort of mouthfeel and stuff. So yeah, that's probably not what I would say is a prime kind of January drinking beer, but maybe if you're looking for something a little bit lighter, and you're trying to reduce the ABV sort of level, then Grisette's a good option. But otherwise, like summertime, Grisette for me, I think I'm going to be brewing some of this in the summer for barbecue drinking, because I think it's going to be a perfect summer like barbecue drinking beer for me. So yeah, it's really good. And again, yeah, duration. I think anything sort of like European traditional kind of styles, they really seem to nail it for me, like pretty much without fault.
He's pretty good, isn't he? Right.
But very good. Yeah, I'm not sure if I've ever drunk a Grisette.
Well, I was saying at the start
great.
that I think the first one I'd ever tried was someone just really gave me a can at London Beer Festival right at the end, because they'd stopped serving and I looked really sad. Somebody threw a can of Lervig Grisette at me. So I was like, oh, thank you very much. Tried it, and then I was like, oh, that's really good. So kind of sort them out after that. But yeah, it's a nice style to try out if you haven't already done so.
Perfect.
Can I go, Owen?
Hey,
Go on,
yeah,
Chris.
I can go if you like.
All right.
I have a confession.
What's up?
It's not strictly a commercial beer, but it is out of a can.
Aha!
So this is a. Oh, is that the one you're going for as well? No. So this is a homebrew beer from our very own Patreon, Ron Muir, from the.
I don't think Ron's in the chat tonight, is he?
Sunny Isles of Scotland. Ron's an absolute legend. He has provided not only one but two cans of stout called Stout of Heaven. This is an award-winning 11% Imperial whiskey barrel-aged stout. So I don't know if he's genuinely like it's been put into a whiskey barrel, or whether he's just used some whiskey barrel pieces in the beer.
I'm fairly sure it went into a barrel.
Amazing. So this his brewery is called Driveway Drams. And I don't know what I've done with it, but he also sent me a really cool plectrum.
You got the pick as well.
Yeah, so
Oscar's got that on his.
I was well chuffed with
his guitar.
Yeah, I've got a Driveway Drams pick, so that's perfect for me.
Mine's probably disappeared already because my daughter just steals them. Like whenever I put them on a guitar, she nicks them.
Yeah, my kids have a temperament for them as well.
Yeah.
But I don't know if he brewed this with someone else, because it says Driveway Drams versus Lindorus.
I think it was a little bit of a collaboration effort from what I
Cola.
remember Ron telling me. So
it is absolutely.
In fact, the whole barrel side of it, I think he might have said that they sort of chipped together for a barrel to age beers, and that I think that might be what was going on. I may be wrong, but that's something along those lines.
But it smells beautiful. Absolutely
I did actually
jet black.
Drink one of those
no
on
head.
the after party for the Christmas special, and it was pretty good.
Mm.
Well, I was pretty shit faced by that point. So
Yes, you were.
Carbonation is on point. It's got a lovely sweetness to it. The whiskey oakness isn't overpowering. It's got a really lovely kind of light dark fruit lingering flavor that's kind of combined with like a very, very light licorice kind of vibe going on as well. There's no like ashiness. There's no like what am I looking for? Cigarette ashiness that you can sometimes get with stouts. Do you ever get that?
yeah, I know what you mean.
Kind of almost tastes a bit like an ashtray.
Kind of acrid roastiness from the dark.
Yeah, which is super common actually with like big imperial stouts, especially homebrewed ones. Absolutely stellar, absolutely brilliant run. Love that.
It was a really good beer. I think even through
Lovely body.
The beery fog of me drinking it last time, I did remember it being a really good effort.
That is a banger, and it's got that kind of. It's a sipper, right? 11%, obviously, but it's just got an extra bit of weight coming from that whiskey vibe.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure if you guys get that. If you ever have like a beer that is barrel aged, sometimes it does just carry just an extra bit of girth. You know, it's a bit girthier. It just makes it more decadent.
A bit of extra girth on the way in.
Yeah,
I know what you're getting at.
It's just harder to get down. So yeah, that's
just keep that gag reflex under control, Owen.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, that's my pseudo commercial beer review.
Right, I've been sat here shaking my head for the last minute with you two. So I have what can only be described as a fairly disappointing beer.
One of those podcasts.
Oh no.
I was expecting so much from this, especially the way that it had been hyped up by certain people, and especially given this is my fourth beer from this brewery, and I actually really like the brewery. So I went with Burning Skies Saison Automne, which is it's basically an autumnal beer that's been fermented on local whole elderberries with our house Saison yeast strain, pleasing to the eye with light and crisp burgundy flavors. Well, honestly, it's a bit pink, which is kind of what you'd expect, but I'm not really that impressed with this beer, I'll be honest. It's kind of lacking quite a lot of flavor. It's got that Saison smell, but none of the Saison flavor. And I'll be honest with you, I can't taste elderberries in it at all. Tastes all right.
Just nothing, a bit meh.
Yeah, just a bit shit, really. I wish I'd gone for one of the other beers. I picked this up. The guys at work were awesome, and they got me a gift voucher for North Brewing for Christmas. And me and the wife and the two kids went down to North Brewing, and incidentally, Little Bow Boy, holy shit, that was awesome. But the beers, the actual tap is amazing. There's loads and loads and loads of stuff, loads of guest beers and stuff, and they have these like 4 massive fridges, which is full of like North beers and guest beers and other stuff and bits and bats and whatnot. And my daughter saw this one and really liked the can art, which I have to admit is pretty cool. And she said, "You've got to buy this one, Daddy." So I thought, well, it's Burning Sky. It's going to be pretty decent. I'll get that. And I've got home and I've saved it specifically for the podcast, and I'm kind of pissed off that I have, really.
On paper, it sounds like a great beer.
It's missing.
It's just one of those that doesn't quite meet the hype, right?
Everything's muted. So like the Saison-ness is muted. That kind of farmhouse funk is muted. The elderberries are muted. Honestly, if you blindfolded me and got me to taste this, I would say it was simply a beer that had gone off slightly, that was moderately infected. And that's crushing.
Wow.
It's interesting, like the color of it, because it kind of looks pretty light for something that's, elderberries will give you a very dark black color. Like they use them in winemaking for making pseudo red country wines or whatever with blackberries usually. So it doesn't look like there's a huge amount been used, to be honest, to give it that sort of color. Maybe that's why it's not really delivering on the flavor.
It's a bit meh. I mean, don't get me wrong, I'll finish it. I'm Yorkshire and tight, but it's not really flicking my bean. Let's put it that. It's not gonna dissuade me from buying Burning Sky beers in the future. I'll be honest with you, because
no, it shouldn't.
Burning Sky's beers, the other 3 that I have had have been phenomenal.
Yeah.
Okay, in fact, I think my next brewery order is going to be going to Burning Sky. But I
was going to say I still need to do the brewery order for Burning Sky.
I won't be getting this one.
I realised they weren't on Bruiser, so I can't get them that way. So I'll have to do a direct order.
I'm going to do the same thing, but I'm going to wait until they've got all of the special seasonal bottles, and I'm going to go nuts. Because It's going to be like the 200 quid.
There's going to be a splurge.
It's going to be a once a year full on.
I mean, it's drinking. It's going down. I'm just struggling to get the flavors that are promised on the can. Does that make sense?
I mean, the other thing is like the sort of description of that. That sounds like a beer that would have been should have been sort of done as a bottled beer that's going to be aged for longer and all the rest of it. So it's a bit. I don't know, it sounds a bit odd to me for that to be a canned, probably quite quick turnaround sort of beer.
The other thing that's really killing me on this is the fact that it's got lemon zest in his wine. Getting any of that. It's 4.2%. But I think this should be hitting a lot harder than it is. Has it got a can date on it? Wait there. 17th of October 22. So it's only a couple of months old, just over a couple of months. I don't know. Look, it's a bit meh. It is what it is. I'm not gonna kick off because the other three have been phenomenal. And if you're batting 1,000, then clearly you're cheating.
Yeah. Well, there we go. That's the commercial beers done, right? So
disappointing end to a commercial break.
You win some, you lose some.
We've ended on a flop, but never mind.
I mean, other people have probably drunk this and gone, fuck me, it's amazing. It might be my uneducated palate. But the thing that really got me, and the one bit that I really wanted to taste is the crisp burgundy flavors. It literally says with light and crisp burgundy flavors at the end of it. And I thought...
I can't really picture a crisp burgundy flavor in my mind because I don't think of burgundy and go, "Ooh, that's a crisp burgundy."
Are we talking like, well, that's just a color, but are we talking about like a burgundy wine?
I think so. I think that's what they're aiming for.
Think so.
So it'd be kind of
like I said, the elderberry is supposed to, as a country wine like edition, is supposed to do a good job of emulating sort of fairly deep, kind of rich, like red grape wines like a burgundy or something like that.
Not getting any of that.
So yeah, but like I said, the color on that doesn't look like it's dark enough for there to be enough elderberry in there for that to really come through. So
genuinely tricky. This is peach colored. It's
really?
It
looks brown. It looks brown on camera, but
yeah, that's probably because of the lack of light. But it's quite peachy. It's quite a peachy color more than anything else. Do you know what? I'm gonna have to fucking have another beer now.
Well, anyway,
we're gonna go second commercial. We're gonna go follow up commercial beer, or are we gonna?
He's gonna save it for afters. I mean, we've kind of gone through everything on the list, haven't we? Do we need to do a summary of what we've covered?
Well, was there anything else we wanted to talk about in terms of we had like noted down solutions?
Yeah, we kind of went through those
them.
as we did
so
issues, didn't we?
Yeah, I guess we talked about kind of chemical scrubbing solutions, counter pressure systems. I think there was one point that I didn't mention that came to mind when we were talking about ITAPs or any form of counter pressure systems is when you're bottling beer for competition is just purge the crap out of that bottle.
Yeah.
Like go nuts on the purging. You want absolutely zero oxygen in that bottle.
And clean the whole system out thoroughly as well before you start, I think is another thing that maybe people might not pay attention to the sort of hygiene of the actual bottling equipment as much as they do the bottles and the other stuff that the beer's actually coming out of. So that that bit going in between is just as important because you can pick stuff up in the transfer as well.
Particularly things like the top of the keg posts and stuff, which often can get quite dirty, sticky, nasty. Also purging all of that of oxygen as well. So, for my ITAP, I've got,
Yep.
beer line. If that's empty, then
Yeah, those
know,
like
find a way
transfer
of
lines
purging
and stuff. Keep
oxygen
an eye
out
on
of that.
those because, like, I mean, the connectors and stuff and the lines on the iTap or whatever will be sat around for weeks or months sometimes for me, not doing anything. So I always like to make sure that I flush them out with Star San, obviously at the end of any bottling that I'm doing with it, and just leave it sat with that in
Purple
them.
line
So,
cleaner as well,
and then
man.
give it another blast through usually before I start using it again at least. And yeah, probably an intermittent use of something a little bit more antibacterial like purple line cleaner or something is definitely going to be a good idea, isn't it? To
Definitely.
do the belt and
Definitely.
braces approach to it.
Just treat it as if it's something that you would use in the kitchen, something that you want to keep super clean, and just give it a real good. Just fucking treat everything. These are competition beers, okay? If you win a competition, then you're doing really, really well. You've clearly produced a very good beer. But just make sure that everything that you're doing, from the cleanliness of the bottles, the cleanliness of your bottling system, using the correct bottle, making sure your fermentation's finished, making sure that, the packaging time, use a decent courier, 24-hour courier. From your step to their step when they put it into a fridge should be the shortest time possible. If you've got a car and they're within 10 miles, fucking deliver it. Just fucking drive there and do it. It's all what you're trying to do is ensure that you have the best chance for the judges to see your beer in its best shape that they can, and that's ultimately it.
I think what we've talked about today in terms of packaging, transportation, right, is probably the biggest barrier to entry to doing well at competitions.
Yep,
100%.
You can have a fantastic beer, right? That if the judges could come around your house and pull a sample from your tap, they'd be wowed. But if unfortunately, more often than not, beers that arrive at competition, and our experience actually from when we did our competition in the summer, we've been quite candid about our perhaps error in running that in the summer, but actually having spoken to a number of other people that have judged competitions and stuff like that, they said it's pretty common. It's pretty common for a lot of beers to have a lot of flaws. And I think most of those beers probably leave the home brewer without those flaws.
absolutely.
But they then are judged and they have lots of flaws. So clearly it's that bit between the beer coming out the home brewer's tap and the judge trying it where the problem exists. And I think that was probably the genesis of this whole kind of podcast, really,
100%.
in terms of
I think that can be quite
educate, help people to overcome that barrier.
Yeah, I think that can be quite a demoralizing thing for people as well. Like if you're sending off this beer and you're drinking it at home, going, well, I thought it was quite good, and then it comes back and you've got like a 15 out of 50 score on it, and it's got all the flaws ticked, and whatever. There must be a lot of people that just get put right off of the whole sort of idea of entering competitions, because essentially they're drinking a beer that's probably decent, and it might not have won the competition, but it would have probably got a decent score and got some positive feedback, and they would have felt good about that, versus a beer that's completely different at the point of being judged to what it is when they're drinking at home. And I mean, I'll come back to the whole thing of like plastic bottles and stuff. I mean, I've still had beers in fairly recent history where I've sent them off, and like the feedback, I just like, I can't fathom how the feedback reflects what I'm tasting at home. Maybe that's just the beer that's just gone wrong between the point of me packaging it and it getting to the competition. Or maybe it's just a shit beer and I've got terrible taste buds. But it's I think it's something that will potentially, if you're not putting that effort in to get it there in good condition, you're gonna be put off the whole idea of doing competitions in the first place, and that would be a real shame, because there's a lot of value in it. I think when they're actually judging the beer as it is at the point where you're packaging it for them to try, basically.
Yeah, I would agree. Absolutely, Tricky. I think my personal experience of homebrew competition, I remember I entered the UK National probably 3 years ago and got an honourable mention for a double IPA, like hazy double IPA. Obviously turned up in good condition. I then entered I think it was the Malt Miller NEPA competition they did with Verdun.
Yep.
And scored terribly. They basically said it was completely oxidized. It was dreadful.
Yep.
Just dog shit. So huge variance in terms of kind of that experience. And I think, I think if you're really serious about competition brewing, it's quite easy to be able to replicate the whole experience at home. So test out your packaging process, right?
That's a really good idea, actually.
Put some, put the beer in PET in plastic bottles, put it in glass bottles, test some stuff out, leave it somewhere lukewarm for a couple of days.
Shake it about a bit, like it's been in
shake it about,
transit.
put it in the fridge for a couple of days, try it out. Right, it's probably going to take you a week to kind of then start to work out, did that work? Did it not work? Then you can start working out, well, why might it not have worked? Try a different process. So you can replicate these things at home reasonably easily.
Can I just jump in?
I'd recommend that.
I'm going to agree with absolutely everything that you've said, but I'm sat here and I am scientifically analysing the cause of these particular off flavors that people are noticing so much in competition. Okay. And what I would say, my advice would be, get into the habit when you're kegging your beer, because I can only go off the kegging front. Okay. Bottling, Tricky will talk you through that, bottling buckets and, mixing and carbon.
It's been a long time, but there's videos for that on the channel.
There's a video on that one. What I would suggest is get into the habit of putting some form of either Camden tablet or the powdered version into your keg at the point where you transfer your beer in, because it will stop oxidation. It will potentially stop the re-fermentation resulting in acetaldehyde, diacetyl. It's probably going to slow infection. Skunking, if you're using clear bottles, there's no fucking help for you. Get back in the sea. But the rest of those, something which is going to put a halt to that fermentation in the bottle, scavenge the oxygen, reduce the formation of acetaldehyde, reduce the formation of diacetyl. It's going to stop those from happening, or at the very least, it's going to slow them so that any transit through the system is going to have a much less of an effect. That would be my personal sort of advice, would be get into the habit of putting something in your kegs as an oxygen scavenger, which also has the function of retarding the yeast function, and you are going to have a much happier experience when you do send a beer out as a beer mail.
It's about trying to achieve a stable product, essentially, isn't it? At the end of the day, so that's what you're looking for, really.
You're muted, Owen.
You're on mute. Can you hear me? Hear me now.
We can hear you now, Owen.
Hear me now.
So I would say that that's probably the biggest difference between commercial brewers and home brewers, is a stable product.
Definitely.
Absolutely. It's shelf stable. I would say, as just to err of caution on the use of metabisulfite, is to ensure that you don't use too much.
Oh, definitely.
It's very powerful, and it can have quite adverse effects and can be perceivable in the flavour of the beer if you use too much. So go on Google, check out the amount. I think it's from memory 10 parts per million, not to exceed 10 parts per million.
Essentially, if you've got the powdered version, it's roughly half the size of a grain of normal white rice is about the amount that you put in a keg.
Yeah, so I think you can weigh out the if you have the powdered form, it's a lot easier to do rather than cutting up a tablet, grinding it down. You want to get it to powder form, get out your drug dealer scales, measure it out precisely. You don't want to use too
Your
much.
drug dealer scales aren't going to go down low enough.
Really? And they should do, right?
I mean, you're talking probably 0.1 of a gram.
Yeah. Well, I think drug dealer scales go to 2 decimal places, so you should be.
Do they really? Do they really? No, they fucking don't.
All right. Anyway, rule of thumb: half the size of a grain of rice. Sorry, I've not used ascorbic acid, so I don't know if there are.
You can't really overdo ascorbic acid,
so you can just lob that in, and it will do its job.
Also market it as a health drink afterwards, so you know.
Yeah, it's got added vitamin C,
fortified with vitamin C.
Yeah, perfect.
There you go. I think we need to stop beating this fucking dead donkey and just say, look, we've given you a lot of information there. This may require you to re-listen to this podcast, maybe take some notes, do your own research, because the bottom line is these are things which are easily avoidable. It's just a question. It's your 7Ps to success, isn't it? That's all this comes down to. Bit of prior preparation and planning, and you're going to end up with a really good product at the end that's stable going through the mail system. We can't help you with the strikes. I can recommend DPD. I could recommend any other 24-hour courier. And if you're going to use Royal Mail and you absolutely want it to be there, it's probably for 2 bottles, it's probably going to cost you about £7 for special delivery. Just get it there. Just get it there. That's all it comes down to.
And I think on my point of testing out stuff at home is when you bottle your beer for competition, bottle an extra one and put it in your fridge, and then you can open it on the day that they're judging, so you can actually get a proper perception of what. So if you can treat it in the same way as you think it might have been through that journey, is it gives you a good perception of whether or not you think your beer turned up and how the judges might perceive it. And I think that helps to, if anything, manage your own expectations.
Yeah,
because it's not going to taste like it just came out the tap. Sorry to inform everyone of that sad fact, but that is not the case.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think even under the best circumstances, it's probably going to be degraded a little bit, at least, you know, versus something that's fresh off the tap. So, yeah, I think that's a really good idea there. So, yeah.
Beer doesn't travel well. Just remember that one as well.
It doesn't. But on a positive note, is generally when beers are judged, is they tend to, despite the fact that there is BJCP scoring guides, etc., is they tend to all be judged relatively against one another.
Yeah. And everyone's in the same boat.
They're not lobbing in like, you know, a Duval sample as a control to the Saison table, because frankly everything will score sub 15 when you've got a Duval control, right? So they tend to end up being compared to one another in perspective. So everyone's kind of on a fair playing field. The advice we've given you today helps you, I guess. It gives you an edge on that playing field.
It does indeed. Gentlemen, shall we knock this one on the head?
Yeah, let's wrap it up there.
Head to the after party.
The after party.
It's not going to be a long one, but we're going to do an after party anyway. So, Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us on this episode 59 of the Hop Edition. Thanks again to Brewcake Tap for being a sponsor. Thank you again to Liam Poole for being a hop star. This episode is dedicated to you, son. And I just want to say thanks for listening, because it's been a couple of weeks since we've done one, but we have some good shit coming up over the next few weeks. Trust me on that one.
And Happy New Year, everybody. May your brews go well in 2023.
Yeah, we got past the fucking winter equinox. Well done. It's Happy New Year. I hope you all got rid of your hangovers, and I hope to God that we can just carry on doing what we're doing, because I really enjoy this. So, Owen, thank you. Tricky, thank you.
Pleasure. Always happy to be here.
Cheers and good night.
Take it easy, peeps. Hop Edition out.
Drink hard. Bye.
Right, for those of you who are currently still
Busting for a piss.
Go and have a piss then. For those of you who are still on the chat and wish to join us for an after party, that is the link to the Video Ninja and
episode 59. Next 160.
And that is the password for you to be able to join us. So if you want to join us, jump on the chat. We'll have a bit of a gas. Once whoever's joining is going to join, we will probably move over to a Jitsi link, because Jitsi seems to be a little bit easier. Other than that, thanks for joining us, people, and I am going to stop the stream right about now. Love y'all.
Bye.
Bye.